make sure you check out my website pcteach.me, where you can look at all the videos in particular category orders, also have the ability to contribute your own posts if you wish, and I hope to see you there. So with the data source created from the previous video, we're now ready to actually look at the data source views themselves. So what is a data source view? Well, I think it's best just to show you rather than talk about it. So I'm just going to right click, do a new data source view, choose next. Fundamentally, the first thing it needs is a data source to look at. Funny that. So what we've got is we've got the relational data source already created here. So with it selected, I'm going to click on to next. And then what it should do is bring up a list of tables that we want to actually bring across. Now, because if I just make this a little bit bigger, and then what I'm going to do is just jump back into SQL Server for a moment. The data source, the AdventureWorks DW 2008 database has actually got an awful lot of linking already. There will be keys on each of these, which they've already been defined, and I think the best way of looking at this is if I go and create a database diagram. Let me just make sure there aren't any on there. No, let's just create one. So, new database diagram, and the diagram and data source view are very similar to each other actually, with one major difference which we'll come to in a moment. But basically, let me just pick the customer and let me add that, and there it is, and then we've got the customer key. So let's just go to the reseller and add that. Are there any connections between the two of them? No, there isn't. Let's have a look at internet sales then. There should be one there. Let's just close those and let's just see how they're all fitting in. Oh dear, let's have a look. There we go. So there's our link between them. I'll just adjust the zoom. Holding down the control key and the mouse wheel will adjust the zoom. So apologies for the quality of view there, but we've got our dim customer table to our internet sales, and there's a link between them which I can't really go into at the moment, but basically it is the customer key which is joining them together. Now that is a standard SQL diagram which you've probably used tons of times in the past. Now I'm just going to close that. No, let's go back into our information here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add, say, the customer table, and then I'm just going to click on to the arrow to the right so it brings it across. Now notice it actually has add related tables. It's very similar to what you can do in diagrams, where you can tell it, well, I want this table, but give me everything where there's joins or, relationships, key, primary to foreign key relationships. So if I click on that, it should then bring in all the other tables which are associated, but only to one level, i.e. once I've hit the fact table, this fact table could go off to many other particular dimensions. So what you would have to do is then go and find those as well. So in this case it's picking up the internet fact sales and the fact surveys response. I'm just going to remove that. I'm going to remove the geography one as well, and in fact no, let me add the geography one back in again. Now that's all I'm going to have for the time being. I'm going to click on next. It's now asking me for a data source view name. Don't worry, you can always add or remove from this. So I'm just going to call it DSV, data source view, AdventureWorks 2008. Keep it again consistent. And then what it will now do is it will now create the view for me. And lo and behold, oh look, there we are. We've now got our sort of diagram screen again. But this is where the equivalents sort of stop now. Let me give you another example. What I'm going to do is just right click and I'm going to add another table to it. Notice on the fact table there's a lot of dates in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the dim date table, and then OK. Now notice now the number of arrows which are going to that specific table. Now if this was in SQL, that would be an impossible link. What we would be saying in SQL terms is that I am linking on the due date, ship date and order date all at the same time. And so that would mean on a linking basis, if I was doing a select star from join fact to date, all records would have to be the same for it to fit in. Well, in data source views, it doesn't work that way. Data source views is just telling you there's actually multiple connections to this one dimension. It does not in any way mean that it's going to join row by row. This is more a pictorial representation of saying there are a number of connections that can go from that dimension table to that fact table. This is not saying join those two tables together, and that is one of the big differences between the data source views to start with, is do not take this as literal. This is more to do with the genericized look and feel of how this all fits together. So we can just keep adding to it and keep going. Now, one of the things that we may want to actually do on here is start grouping the information together. For example, if I start adding some more tables in fact, let me just go completely crazy and add them all in. If I OK that now, look at this now. I'm just going to click on the button at the bottom right, this little up, down, left, right arrow, and that just shows you a quick zoom out of the whole thing, and my golly, look at it, it is absolutely massive. Perhaps not the best thing I've done. So what you probably will want to do is look at things where we can actually narrow it down, hide them. So for example, can you see this V associate sequence orders and V associate sequence line items and the sys diagrams? They are on their own, they are doing nothing, they are absolutely pointless to our actual design. So what I'm going to do is we have this diagram organizer over here, and what it will allow us to do is if I right click, alternatively I believe up here we have a new diagram button up here which does the same thing. What this will do is allow me to now actually put these tables into different areas. So what were they called again? They were these V associate tables. So all we do is we just hold down the mouse button and drag to slap them in. And drag to slap them in. And drag to slap them in. Ooh. And we've got the V target mail, V target series, dump, and so forth. So what's that done to the all tables view? Well, nothing, has it? Because it's all tables. What we would do is we would then create a series of different diagrams to look at those specific areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this and not very professionally call it junk because I'm not interested in those tables. I'm going to right click again and do another new diagram, but I'm going to be a bit more specific on this one and call this customers. So we know for a fact that we've got the customer table. We've also got potentially the geography table, and we've also got the internet sales fact table, and there we go. So we're back to where we were before, but rather than seeing everything in one view, we've now only got a slice of that information, which is just filtered basically down to those tables. So remember, whatever I do in here will also affect the other views. It just means that I'm just localizing, filtering down to very specific areas instead. So great, we've got this data source view, but what on earth do we do with it? Well, this is the next stage of denormalization. What we've done in the previous steps, for example using integration services, is we've taken a highly normalized database, which is our transactions, through to a denormalized where it's ready for summation. However, we've still got certain things in here which we may not want the end user to either see or want to show it in a different way. For example, dim customer. Dim is an actual database but a database terminology dimension. Is your senior manager going to want to care about what dim is? No. Your senior manager is going to be interested in the word customer. He's going to be interested in the word geography. So what we can do is when we click on each one of these, again, different to the system diagrams that you can do in SQL, can you see that we have this properties area where you're going to be spending a lot of your life, and in here we can either put a description in to make it a bit more friendly. That depends on the application that the end user is going to be using with cubes, because it may bring up the description, but that depends on how good the actual editor, if you will, the viewer of the cube software, so the client software. So I'm going to leave that blank, but we've got a friendly name. Now that definitely is going to come in, so I'm just going to get rid of the word dim and then hit enter, and so there we go. So the real name's called dim customer, but the friendly name is called customer. Notice I cannot change this, and nor should I. It is just purely that area only. I'm going to do the same thing here. So I don't want fact, I want internet sales, and you're perfectly within your mind now to actually put spaces in if you wanted to. So there we go, we've done that. I'm just going to click on the save all icon just so it's up to date, and now I'm going to go back into the all tables, and fundamentally let's have a look for customer. And as you can see, it's no longer saying dim customer, it's saying customer. So it just goes to prove that all I'm doing is I'm looking at a particular portion of this information, not everything. So that's my information there. Now what about the fields underneath it, like first name? Well, if I click on it, again what I've got is the same thing. I can put a description in, which is friendly, and I can also put in a friendly name, so I'm going to put some spaces in. And away you go. You can go crazy, but notice now that each one of these has brackets next to it, because again, fundamentally it is still known as first name. It is just the friendly name that the end user is going to see is going to show it differently. So what about hiding things? For example, the order date key, we may want to put the dates in, but am I really wanting to show the order date key on here? Well, do we hide it? No, you don't. Remember, the data source view is telling the cube where the data is and how it's structured. Although we can change certain aspects of it, like the captions or the friendly names to it, which just saves time later on, we can change these later on incidentally, but we're doing it at the data source view level. So that means if I change it here, any dimension or cube going forward that will be using the customer table will already have that alteration on it. So it's just important to understand it's best to do the changes of the names here, but you're not hiding data. All you're doing is you're keeping it visible. All you're doing is you're just making it friendlier for the end user. Now there are other things we may want to actually do. There may be certain calculations and so forth that we want to do. So in this case we've got the first name and last name. What if I wanted to make a full name field? Well, you could argue and say this could have been done at the integration services level, and I personally probably would have done that. However, if there are certain things that you want to add afterwards, we can do them here, and this is done by right clicking at the top on the actual table, and then in here you should have a new named calculation. Any of you that are going for the exams, named calculation is important. So if you do name calculation, what is the column name going to be called? I'm going to call it full name. Oops. And what is the expression? Well, it's going to be first name and it's then going to be last name. Now if it doesn't like it, it will kick and scream at this point. So it doesn't like it because I'm doing invalid column name quote quote. Now this could be because I'm using the wrong expressions. There we go, so we've now got full name. Let's just be absolutely clear on what I did there. If I just right click and do edit. Welcome to Analysis Services. There is probably about 3 different ways of actually coding now. You've got the single quotes for SQL, you've got double quotes for VB, and you've got double quotes for when it comes to certain if statements in Analysis Services. Again, a derivative of VB. So you've got to be careful because I'm used to putting in ampersands quite a lot for concatenation. In this case it's pluses, but it's just having to keep on top of all the different areas and what syntaxes should be used. So I've got that there, and I'll just OK. You could incidentally have done case statements as well, so if you wanted to incorporate the middle name, you could have done by doing a case statement. If that's null, then ignore it, otherwise put in the full name. And there we are, we've now got a full name, but notice it is actually in there with a little calculation on it, but there is no friendly name. The reason is it's already should be at the friendly name stage, so really what you should be doing is actually putting in the space at that point. So you can put calculations after the fact. Now the question is, why would you want to do that? Well, let's say that the data source you're referring to is read-only. You have no control of where the data warehouse information is coming from. If that's the case, then you can't do the transformations I alluded to earlier with integration services by concatenating the full name. What you'd have to do instead is you'd have to do it in the data source view. Again, that's something that the exams are very, very important at trying to glean out of you to ensure that you understand the difference between why you would have it in the data source view versus why you would have it in the integration services data warehouse. And the reason being is because it's read-only. Also, the other thing to bear in mind is I could actually have multiple data sources in here going into one data source view. For example, I have an Excel file that also has lookup information that I need for my cube, and therefore I could add another data source and then also incorporate it into here. And if that's the case, then I may need to do even further sort of name calculations. Now, going back to this read-only database again, the final thing on the data source view at this stage, which is important, is that we can do a named calculation, but we can also, if I just go off into a spare area here and right click, we can also do a new named query. Now, a new named query allows you to create your own table like so, and let's just wait for it to come up, and you'll find it looks very, very familiar. This basically is part of Management Studio, SQL Management Studio, so I can call it whatever I want. So I'm going to just call it VW test, and VW for view. And then what I can do is, if I right click, I can choose Add Table, and then here is my tables. I'm just going to put in the customer again, and I'm also going to put in the geography, and close. So there we go. So I'm just going to put in the title, first name, last name. Notice there will be no full name here. That is because I would need to add a named calculation, or I could actually do it in the SQL here if I wanted to. And I'm just going to slap the city in, and then I'm going to OK it. And there we go. So I've now created my own little table. Now if I right click, I should also be able to explore the data, which is the first, I believe, 200 rows. Let's have a look. Load sample data. Okay. Believe it's the first 200 rows, but there we go. There's our titles. Oddly, annoyingly, I've picked blank ones, but there's the odd Mr. and Miss there. First name, last name, and so forth. I can look at it in different ways by using a pivot table if necessary, a chart. I'll get onto that in a short while, and then a pivot chart as well. Now, I'm just going to close this because it's a separate window. Notice we've got keys on all of these other particular tables that we've got in here. We haven't got anything on this test one. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to fix that now. I'm going to edit the name query, and I'm going to add in the customer ID wherever that may be. Now there we go. Excuse me, customer key. Now with that on here, because this is a view, Analysis Services doesn't know what is the primary key. So what we have is the ability to right click and choose Set Logical Primary Key. Now what that does now is it basically makes a virtual primary key, and you're just telling it from now on the customer key is important, so then technically I could then link it to the customer information like so. And because it's got a key on it, it now knows it's more or less a one-to-one relationship. You can double click on it and then you can change it if necessary, and reverse. We'll come to that later. So there we are, that's our information and our linking. And the final thing to finish off the data source view is, I said on one of the earlier videos that it's a good idea with a piece of paper to actually try and group all your information together. Now that is easier said than done. For example, customers, geography, and so forth. Well, what we can do is if we right click on any of these and choose explore data, so we'll just actually no, we'll stick with the view I've created and explore data. This is our information with the customer keys that I've talked about, but then we've actually got the chart information. Now this is important because this actually shows you frequency of information of where everything hits, and so you can see there's quite a lot of people called Blake, there's a lot of people called Jose, and so forth. And the reason being is it's just copied data repeated over and over again. But you can see there's trends in your information. Now this can be very, very, very useful when you're actually trying to work out, how do I consolidate things into a particular dimension? How do I get things into a, like that one-to-many attribute, one being the dimension, many being the fact again. So you can actually go through these particular views to see this information in more detail. There's different ways of showing it, and you can then ultimately print it out. Pie charts, yay, look pretty, but I'm not exactly sure how useful they are. I think bar charts are probably the best way of looking at it. Again, you can then look at pivot tables to drag and drop your information. So I could say I want to look at city. I'm interested in the customer keys. That's probably going to do a sum. But then you can look at the information in different ways, and then look at your pivot charts if necessary. Utterly useless in this regard, but basically just a way of you doing detailed analysis on each individual dimension. So I'm going to close that, and now at this point I'm actually going to save the work. So as the overview, that is our bit done really. The next step is we're going to create from scratch a new project, and then we're actually going to start building our dimensions and cubes together. So next video, I promise we'll now get our hands absolutely dirty. So thanks for watching.